Well, it's time to finally get to talk about the outcome of my listening test and comparison between the standard Jelco 12-inch arm and the IsoKinetik upgraded Silver Melody. Now, I realise this is probably of not a lot of interest to many people. The Jelco arms are no longer available new. They're quite hard to find second hand. If you do seek one out, they are well worth it though. To my mind, especially the 12-inch version of the SA750, or the SA750L for long. Remember, they do a 9.5, a 10, and a 12-inch version. The way I conducted this was to use the same cartridge in each arm, and I would play a whole album with one arm, remount the cartridge in the alternative arm, again quite easy and quick using the standard 52 millimeter mounting distance with one of these jigs, and obviously there was no need to completely rebalance the arm, although I did find that the IsoKinetik counterweight was very finicky, and the slightest touch would actually throw the tracking weight off, so I had to balance the arm quite a few times to ensure that it was tracking at the same tracking weight. As I said in the earlier initial review, I thought the IsoKinetik, that's it, IsoKinetik counterweight was a pain in the arse, and nothing has made me change that point of view. It is totally fiddly, and the slightest movement of it throws it completely out. Whereas the standard Jelco one, even taking it off, putting it back on, you know, moving around, I used a second base where I could just drop the arm in there and leave it to one side without having to touch anything, to make sure that the vertical tracking angle was consistent with each change. I used a set of pre-made spacers which I could put underneath the arm and between the underside of the arm and the arm base, one for each arm, to ensure that when I dropped it down they were always at the same vertical tracking angle. As you can imagine, this took a considerable amount of time, which is why I haven't been back with this follow-up video for a little while. The albums I used were albums that I've been listening to for many, many years, so know them really well. And the results are consistent from album to album to album. All the same attributes between the two arms were found. And to save you, if you don't want to listen to the whole review and me waffling on about various albums, then basically there is some upper mid-band hardness that is present using the black IsoKinetik Silver Melody that isn't present in the standard arm. Having said that, there is slightly better bass definition and slightly better treble definition in the IsoKinetik arm. However, as you listen to it again and again, you become aware that the music is less cohesive with the IsoKinetik. It gives you more insight, but it doesn't seem to put it back together in a meaningful musical way. As I say, the overall sound is less cohesive. The first album I put on was an album called The Dude by Quincy Jones. And here, that upper mid-band hardness gave rise to increased vocal sibilance. And there was marginal, poorer rhythmic flow with the IsoKinetik arm. I'll just call it the ISO arm from now on. And as I say, it didn't give you the relaxed musical insight and the rhythmic flow that album is quite famous for, really. The second album I listened to was Dave Grusin's Mountain Dance. Now, this is one of my favourite all-time albums. And again, although there was an increase in high-frequency detail, more detail in the bass, a bit better definition, overall, there was, as I say, a reduction in the cohesive outcome. This album is truly a rhythmic tour de force. When it's listened to on a good system with good components, it is phenomenal. And that came across with the standard arm, but not so well with the ISO arm. Bass depth and kick drum were certainly enhanced, and these are very well recorded on the album. But you missed out on the integration with the rest of the album. With the Dave Grusin Lee Ritenour album Harlequin, again, the same thing really, more top and bottom detail, but not so musical overall. Crusaders Street Life, again that mid-hardness, vocal sibilance came out in Randy Crawford's vocals. There was a hardness which I'm not used to hearing. And again, overall, less musically satisfying. These are, again, as I say, these are repeatable again and again. The same things I'm hearing on diverse range of albums. A complete change. Another of my all-time favourite albums, Uriah Heep's Demons and Wizards. Now, this is, to me, it was an exciting sound of my youth. I've been listening to this album for over 50 years, and I didn't derive as much enjoyment with the ISO arm as I did with the standard. And from that perspective, I found it very unsatisfying. And indeed, after I'd finished listening to it with the Jelco ISO arm, I had to go and listen, and again, putting the cartridge in to the standard one, I was aware of that less magical overall sound. So I had a break from listening, and I put the Autophon NE Classic SPU back into the arm, the standard arm, and I listened to the album over again a couple of times just to, if you like, have an oral reset, and again got the magic back into that album. And again, a slightly change of style and genre. Miles Davis is A Kind of Blue. Now, I really enjoy my Nimbus supercut of this album, and it's something I play quite often I love the mellow overall sound of the album. I love the way you can hear right into the recording. And initially that sounded a bit more enhanced with the ISO arm, but saxophones came across rather oddly. The saxophone part was, again, if you like, betrayed by this upper hardness and the overall musical coherence. I keep going on about the musical coherence, but it is an important factor. There's no part allowing you to hear every bit of what's going on without the overall sound being able to give you absolute pleasure. And again, time and time, this was reduced with the ISO arm. In the same vein, Coleman Hawkins, the Hawk Flies High album, really good, smooth jazz with a bit of a hard bop edge and really enjoyable, but less enjoyable with the ISO arm than with the standard arm. Now remember, we're talking here about using the Goldring XL GS, which is, as I've stated in the past, a very analytic cartridge. So this would pick out any flaws in the way the music is being presented. So at this stage, I had a feeling that I would be not using that cartridge long term in the ISO arm, and I would be using the Autophon in there and putting the XL GS into the old standard arm and using that as the mainstay for listening. And one of the final albums that really brought this home is Chaka Khan's What You're Gonna Do For Me. Now this already has some hardness to the recording, and this was completely emphasized by the ISO arm to the extent that partway through I just didn't want to listen to the arm or the record anymore. And I thought by this time, as I say, every single record exhibited the same traits, the same aspects to the sound quality overall. So I thought I could probably stop there and then. And what I have now done is mount the Autophon nude elliptical cartridge, the SPU Classic, into the ISO arm, and now permanently mounted the Goldring XL GS into the old standard arm. And now I'm much happier with the end results. The Autophon cartridge, which has a beautiful, smooth, juicy sound, very musical. It makes up for the deficiencies I hear in the ISO arm. And in conclusion, if you did want to get a Jelco 12-inch arm, my takeaway from this is try and get the standard one. I think that they didn't improve the arm, IsoKinetik, with the Silver Melody. I think that the counterweight is awful and doesn't bring anything to the mix purely for setting up the arm, and it is very, very fiddly to use. I don't know whether the head shell is bringing anything to the table. What I'll have to do is perhaps repeat this with a standard head shell and the IsoKinetik head shell and see if there's any perceived difference between the two and whether that ameliorates some of this mid-band hardness. As I say, tested it as delivered in the hole. But now over time, I can spend a little bit of effort, excuse me, trying to find out what's bringing on this upper mid hardness that I'm hearing, and perhaps a head shell change will ameliorate some of that. But I don't know. Perhaps I'll feed back a little later how I feel about that in due course. But for me, the standard arm is a better proposition than the IsoKinetik, and if you're offered one or the other, go for the standard, unless you can get the IsoKinetik version cheaper and you can experiment with different head shells perhaps. But certainly not a bad arm overall, but I don't think IsoKinetik actually improved it. I think they rather made it worse than the standard arm. So that's my part 2 of the comparison between the two arms. As I say, probably of little interest to most people, as you probably won't be looking for a Jelco arm, won't be finding a Jelco 12-inch arm. Certainly not, well, I say certainly not new, but I do know there is a Canadian supplier who has got half a dozen 12-inch Jelco arms, but I think he's asking something like £1,000 for them, which by today's standards for a modern 12-inch arm isn't bad, but with import duties that might be a bit out of the way. Anyway, that's it. That's my part 2. So I'll say goodbye and see you next time. Goodbye.